Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Masson with you today to review episode 7 of Amazon's Rings of Power. This episode is called The Eye, which made me rather um, curious, thinking that perhaps Sauron would appear in this episode, but that in the end, spoiler alert, or lack of spoiler alert, did not transpire. So not quite sure why it's called The Eye at this stage. Maybe that'll become, somebody else will be able to figure that one out because I simply cannot. The episode began where the last one concluded, namely with Galadriel having faced the pyroclastic flow of the volcano exploding towards her, the ash, if you recall, coming at great speed, and her bravely looking it in the face, now being covered by ash in a way that made it look like debris. And I found this extraordinarily implausible. This whole episode, everyone was covered by this gray ash, and looked like a bunch of cheesies walking around with dust on them. But of course, none of them had their lungs burnt out, their hair burnt off, and yet we saw horses running with their manes on fire, and here and there things being absolutely showing the evidence of what would have been this pyroclastic flow, which is just simply everything would have been burnt, and everything that wasn't burnt would have died of asphyxiation. But that's not how it works here. Here we have Galadriel getting up, Theo getting up, wandering around, of course, and her calling for Halbrand, of all characters, sounding rather despondent at this. So it sounds like there's a personal relationship there above all things. Not that she wouldn't be calling for him, but it just seemed a little bit selective on the director's part here. But as I say, I found this remarkably implausible, that in the face of this, or right at the site of the eruption, that they would not be simply all dead. But they're not, and they couldn't be, because of course then the series would not continue. So we start off with that scene, and then we move to the harfoots, which I guess we couldn't leave forever, as much as we would like. And we see a series of signs of devastation there as well, from their travails. And Gandalf is at the site of a tree that is ashen, with the fruit being ashen, nothing there. Gandalf puts his hand on it and speaks words of blessing to grow, and the tree eventually he goes away. It looks like he was not successful. The next day, scene later shows that he was, and it's bearing fruit again. More interestingly, at least for me, as far as the characters in this whole installment in Rings of Power, is we return to the elves, who for my money thus far have been the most likable of the characters, and in particular that the relationship between Elrond and Durin IV, which is very touching, and I think the most appealing of all of the relationships in the whole installment. And it just reminds me of how lacking they are elsewhere. As I say, Galadriel is very unlikable. There's nothing appealing about her whatsoever, other than her name. She's a pretty actress, of course, that's playing her, but it's not enough. There's no human interest there. We have no sense of relationships that we would treasure either. There's nothing of the good, the true, and the beautiful in this that makes us connect with them, or any sense of the good in the characters. And again, without that, we just have names, and we have action, but action without character. And action without character is, quite frankly, not that different from a fan fiction CGI extravaganza, which is what we've got thus far. But there is a discussion between Durin and his father, so Durin III and Durin IV, the fourth being the friend of Elrond, and Durin the Elder refuses Elrond's request to mine the mithril because he says that there is too much risk involved in digging deeply. And of course, we know, having seen The Lord of the Rings, that this is what exactly happened, that the elves dug too deeply, said Gandalf, and for that reason a Balrog was awakened. And so we can see the wisdom in his counsel. But for his son, this is terrible because he's effectively condemning the elves to die. Or to have to leave Middle Earth. And Durin, in his wisdom, says that that's not a choice, that they have consigned themselves to that, and there's nothing he can do about that. So he has a limited scope of sovereignty and responsibility, and he's not going to extend beyond that. Now, this is the Council of Wisdom, actually. And in fact, all he says is that if this is to be the case, that the elves will pass from Middle Earth, then it may be so willed by wiser beings than they, and acknowledges then a continuity of wisdom there, and also of restraint and limitations on his own ability to change things. But obviously it's a sad episode, and Elrond accepts it and leaves. But of course, now we have development of Durin's character, which makes him, quite frankly, unlikable. The son, and if he's unlikable, how much more his wife, who seems simply to be a firebrand, and is using her natural feminine motivational skills. This is emotionally wrong, we can't allow this, and incites her husband to go against her father, whom she speaks of in very bad terms, and he is swayed by her. So it's just sort of a Lady Macbeth, except we're supposed to be on the side of Lady Macbeth here. And she's incensed by this, and in particular, for the sake of her husband, she is motivated that he do something against his father's wishes. Now, as I say, to my mind, this brings to mind Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, who's nothing other than a black villain, and his wife likewise, because they decide that they're going to rebel against their liege lord and king, Durin III, in delving into the mines of Moria anyway. So this is nothing other than an act of treason, and would be seen as such by Tolkien. There's no way that this sort of action and the rationale that's given for it would be allowed to stand. The motivation within the context of the story is simply that Durin IV, the red-bearded one, let's call him that, is frustrated and pushes the mithril across the table alongside of the withered, blackened leaf of the tree, and it restores the leaf to its health, removes the blackness from it. And of course, they, seeing this miraculous event transpire, know that they have to then do this because there's proof that the mithril will in fact stop it. It's no longer speculation. And they go back, and they then start digging down. And we'll come back later to the episode that he has with his father. Actually, let me deal with it now. So he has this, his father comes across Elrond and Durin digging, and of course arrests them basically, and has Elrond thrown out of the mines, which seems to me a rather benevolent response to what was already his response to throw him out. There's no further repercussions for Elrond. I would have thought there would most certainly be so in this situation, since the king has decreed already what will happen, and he's gone against that. All it does then is get a petulant little boy weeping Durin IV at how his father has betrayed their heritage, rather than there being treason on his part, it's his father that has betrayed the vision for the future. And although he was supposed to have done great things, moved mountains in the words of his father, he's not allowed him to do anything. He hasn't let him do anything. I mean, he does really come across as a dislikable adolescent, complaining to his father that he doesn't let him get out much or do anything. And his allegiance to his friend Elrond is admirable. However, his betrayal of his father is nothing short of contemptible. And it's an extraordinary bit of dialogue, not just because of the dialogue, but because of what motivates the dialogue. It's not, he doesn't appeal to the fact that if you do this, the whole of Middle Earth is going to be destroyed by Sauron. It's not the appeal to a greater good. It's because it's not fair, etc. I mean, it's very weak, small beer. And I'm shocked at the motivations for the characters that we are to regard as great here. And in response to this, the crest that's around the son's chest is taken off by the father and says, leave it. It's of no use anymore. In other words, he's basically giving up on his son. So it's a very sad episode. It's sad not just because of the breach of relationship between the father and the son, but because of the, I would say, the implosion of character on Durin IV's part. And so we have once again younger characters subverting the wisdom of the older on the simple basis that they feel that it's right to do so. Again, totally contrary to the spirit of Tolkien's work, whatever we make of the motivation for the characters. It's not in keeping with the sense of wisdom that permeates Tolkien's actual work. Let me return back to Galadriel and the scene of devastation there. She comes across none other than Theo. And again, strange dialogue that transpires between them. Theo, who's also dislikable, meeting Galadriel, perhaps his only equivalently dislikable character. And Theo says to Galadriel, "What are you bothered about? It isn't your fault." Galadriel says, "Yes, it is." Now, why it is her fault is beyond scrutiny on my part. I have no idea why she would consider the events that just transpired to be her fault. But she says that it is. And Theo tries to develop some sort of likable character by saying that it isn't, and then explains why it's his fault. And he has good reason for it, because actually it is his fault. He had kept this the hilt of the sword that initiated the whole volcano, and so he can plausibly be blamed for it. But at this point, Galadriel becomes a little bit more likable for the first time, and she's not speaking words of comfort simply in order to comfort, but now acquiring something of a semblance of wisdom here. She says, "What cannot be known hollows the mind. Darken the mind not with guesswork. It darkens the heart to call dark deeds good." She said it would have been, again, they should have done worse things to prevent this. And she's saying that the motivation for good deeds must be good things, and let's not call bad things good. There's a bit of wisdom in her counsel. She redeems the character somewhat here, but at this point, it's nothing sufficient to in any way overturn the general sense that she lacks all wisdom and is a sort of Byronic revenge tragedy hero. So we have, on the one hand, a Lord and Lady Macbeth type figure in Durin, and we have again, Byronic hero here. So it's just extraordinary to me how the writers of the Rings of Power have subverted Tolkien's sense of what heroism is, its connection with the past, etc. And it's particularly sad since Durin is named after Durin, and the reason that they aren't more novel in their naming is simply the greatness of the kings is passed on and is held to be a solid thing. So there's a lineage there. They don't go against tradition. Well, here they do in this rendition. Back to the Theo and Galadriel. Galadriel gives him a sword. Theo's given a sort of a sign of his manhood. He looks happy about this. He develops a little bit of character. Elendil is grief-stricken because it sounds like his son Isildur may have perished in the disaster, and he does genuinely appear grief-stricken. A little bit too much focus on that, I would say, in the episode. Not that they should not focus on that, but the way they do so is by close-ups of his face, rather than setting him in the background and allowing him some privacy there. And they stick him in the foreground, which is it doesn't deal with it very well. I think it could have been done much better. But the queen, Miriel, is blinded by this and her father's prophecy that she would find only darkness is thereby fulfilled. She loses her sight. However, she persists with her commitment to the cause here, and again we find her to be an admirable character in the end. I'm jumping around a bit here because the episode once again goes back to its proclivity to do exactly that. It jumps from one scene to the next. It sticks with them for 5 to 10 minutes and then jumps to one, and we have them all happening at once, and there's no sense of a unity here. So again, whereas the previous episode had a unity of plot, character, and action all tending to one, and therefore it was really working very well, it fragments once again to the various different characters. So we go back to the map of Mordor amongst the harfoots, and Gandalf being given an apple from Eleanor underneath the apple tree. It's sort of symbolic there of what he did, but also this is a tree of life now, which he has created through his work, and a sense of goodness there. But then a cut back to the figures of Galadriel and Theo, and she reveals at this point the reason for her sadness is not only that she has lost Finrod, her brother. We knew about that from the first episode, but apparently also her husband Celeborn. This is new information here. It cannot be correct, at least I hope, unless they change the plot lines later from the Lord of the Rings, because Celeborn is married to Galadriel there. But she believes that he has been lost to her in war. And we're told that, or rather she tells Theo that he is not responsible for what happened because he didn't intend it to be bad. And the wise look upon the intentions there. And she encourages him once again that that there are powers that work beyond darkness, whose purposes transcend our own capacity to scan them. All of which sounds a bit more in keeping with Tolkien's vision, but still not really going to resuscitate Theo's reputation at this point. At any rate, I mentioned the unfortunate encounter between Durin and his father, and the fallout there, which I say only demeans Durin, does nothing to really redeem him. And then they, of course, but they do break through and find the mithril, and the mithril is not to be dug deeply. There is an open passage in which we can see the mithril set in like roots down through the mountain, so you can just chip out of it and you don't have to dig deeply at all. Rather surprising to me, but of course it looks good. And we get the return of those 3 mystic strangers, which we saw a few episodes ago, looking at the crater created by the comet, presumably looking for the stranger, who I believe is Gandalf, and they're still searching. And they also touch the tree that he has just healed, apparently somehow being able to sense his presence there, and it has a yellow flower sticking out of it. But the harfoots have received these strangers in their folly as some sort of friends, unwittingly betray where the stranger has gone, and they in turn receive their dwellings to be destroyed by fire. So whereas Gandalf had blown and we saw something like butterflies come out, the lights there, when they blow, it blows fire onto the Harfoot dwellings, and they burn just like the dwellings of the Southlanders when Mount Doom explodes there. So a little bit of parallelism there. The episode concludes with the Southland camp unable to console Beric, that is Isildur's horse, and Elendil lets him go in the way that will remind the reader or the viewer of what Aragorn had done in letting go the horse that had served too much and had been grief-stricken. So the horse goes off. I think we have every expectation that he will go and find Isildur for us and rescue him in the same way that Aragorn had been rescued at one point. And let me say the penultimate silliness here. The Sadiq, the leader of the Harfoots, is persuaded by the women to go after the stranger against his best counsel. They manage to persuade him to do this, and there's a sort of a revolt against them. So they lead the Harfoots to lead Sadiq to lead the party. So basically the women know best, and they manipulate and orchestrate all the actions here, and he throws up his hands and does what he's told. But at this point, it looks like the expedition has failed. Galadriel says that she's going to go back to the High King Gil-galad to report to him on what she has done, and she doesn't expect any good things out of that. Halbrand, we find, is not dead, but rather has been injured gravely, and he is going to receive some sort of elvish medicine. He's not sufficiently ill not to be able to get on his horse somehow, but and he's getting a little bit of props of chanting from his people there, the king, the king, the king. And the last scenes are the leaf that was healed in the elvish mine falling down to the ground and awakening when it touches the ground a Balrog who's sitting down at the bottom of this. So he hasn't been, they don't have to dig down to find him. He is already there sitting at the bottom. Maybe he just can't get up, but I have no idea. It just seems very odd, but they wanted to include a Balrog here. No connection with an eye per se, but anyway. And the whole episode concludes with the volcano erupting in the background, and Adar telling us that we are no longer in the Southlands, we are in Mordor. So some sort of progression there in terms of the plot line, but really a lot of just rather inappropriate, to my mind, dialogue and demeaning character portraits and implausible action, leading to a very unsatisfying episode. I hope that the conclusion will be better. We shall see that very soon next week. Till then, I'm Dr. Scott Masson. If you like this, please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.